I'm Jason Herbert, and this is A Reckoning. Our guest today, sometime, we're talking about astrophysics, Kelsey. Does time even matter when we're doing this?
It is so arbitrary.
Okay.
Yeah, well,
our guest.
Let's just...
Okay.
It's imaginary.
All right, fine. All right, well, let's imagine that you have a name, and your name is Dr. Kelsey Johnson, and you are Associate Professor of Astronomy at the University of Virginia?
I'm a full professor, dude.
You're I went to your website, madam, and saw this.
Oh, it probably needs to be updated. I'm so bad on... No, I've been a full professor for like 8 years, so I guess it really needs to be updated.
You have done a lot of work, because I did my scoping on you, and I'm so happy to have you on. For those of you listening, you're also the author of a brand new book. This one I'm holding right here. Right? Isn't it beautiful? Into the Unknown, the quest to understand the mysteries of the cosmos. I wrote you a couple nights ago telling you how much I love this book. I'm so excited to talk to you about it.
Yay.
I love this
that makes me so happy.
So much. Oh, are you kidding me?
Okay, tell me more about why you love it. Like, this is good for my soul.
Well, there was a moment, and I shared this on Instagram, where I was reading your book, and you've got a picture of some of the mathematical calculations later in the book. And I posted this, and I had said, reading this while whimpering that I too have a PhD. But this is so much more than I can do. And I love the book because it is so approachable. And I mean that in the absolute best way. You talk like a human. You talk like a person that I like to talk to. And there are tortoises all over.
There are tortoises everywhere. Yep.
I have a thing for tortoises. When I lived in Florida, I used to move all of these gopher tortoises out of the road. I ended up being in a couple of master's theses because they had this thing where an app where you could be like a citizen scientist. When you would see a gopher tortoise, which is critically endangered there, you could log it, like with geotagging and stuff like that.
Yeah.
When you moved out of the road or whatever. And I got to where I could tell the sex of the tortoise. People ask me what I'm doing. I'm sexing tortoises today. Okay. You're a lonely man, Dr. Herbert. But so it's got a thing, and you probably can't, I guess you can see that. Look at that. Look at that.
Oh, that is gorgeous.
Thank you very much. That is from the year 1645. That is a tortoise for people that can't watch right now. That's a sea turtle from Ulysses Aldrovandi. He was a Italian naturalist. And he has sculpted that out. And it was in a book we had at the University of Minnesota. I was friends with the curator of the library. She saw it. She's like, Jason, you got to see this. And then I brought it to a tattoo artist and I said, put this on me forever. So
I endorse that. And, I have a sort of side bet about this book. And if it does good enough, I have a couple tattoos that I am on the hook to get. So,
Okay. Well, this could be tattoo hour with Jason and Kelsey too. So
that would be fun.
I'm down. So I have other ones, but they're Star Wars related and pirates. So there's that. That's for another pod. I want to talk to you before we get into your book and your work and all this stuff. Actually, I want to talk about your work because you are a full professor at the University of Virginia, and I want to ask you, how does one come to be an astrophysicist, and what does that even mean?
I think there are different paths to being an astrophysicist, but all of them have a couple things in common.
Okay.
And for sure, it involves a lot of math and physics, right? There's just no question about that.
Mm-hmm.
But there are different paths, right? I think anyone you ask in this profession got into it for a different reason. And I think that that's great. And so we all approach the subject material a little bit differently, which is important, or else we would all be thinking the same way. But definitely a lot of math and physics. But you had a second part of your question, which I've already forgotten. What was it?
What does an astrophysicist do?
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's a great question. Yeah, that. We try to understand our place in the universe, right? That is the bottom line. We're trying to understand the universe we live in. And that's not super easy because we are really small and the universe is really big and mostly really, really far away. But yeah, all of us who do this, well, okay, maybe there are some outliers who don't do it for this reason, but I don't know why they would do it if they didn't do it for this reason, right? We want to understand the universe we live in. And I don't understand actually. So here's a question. People will ask me sometimes on an airplane, like you're sitting next to someone and you have to make small talk, which for me is like some level of hell because I hate making small talk. They're like, what do you do? And I always kind of debate, like, how do I answer that? Because I know exactly where the conversation is going to go. And if I say I'm an astronomer and they're like, oh, well, why are you an astronomer? Or why are you an astrophysicist? Or however they phrase the question. For me, like, why aren't you? Like, why doesn't everyone want to do this? Because the universe is so freaking cool. How does everyone not get out of bed every morning and be like, you know what? I want to understand our place in the universe. But somehow that seems to not be true. So here we are.
Okay. So you say that, and there's so much of this that comes to place because you're like, well, I want to understand our place in the world. And I'm like, wait a second, isn't that the role of religious people and philosophers? And I'm reading your book, and there's Nietzsche just hanging out. I'm just like, what are you doing? But it makes so much sense because it comes down to these ideas, right? Of how did we get here? Why are we? And this bigger idea, like you kind of end on this idea, it's like, why are we here? And if I'm really glad that you were able to figure that out because I have been searching for 47 years at this point in time to like know.
Okay, well,
help me, Kelsey.
I appreciate that you think I figured it out, but serious. Okay, I tend to joke a lot, but in all like seriousness, and I can almost not say this without joking. Right, we have these huge existential questions that have perplexed humanity for literally like millennia, right?
Right.
And science can take us like a little way there, and then we hit these boundaries of what science, at least today, can do and can address. And then we are in the realm of philosophy and theology. And that's where I want to take the reader, is to this intersection of science and philosophy and theology, because I feel like that is just really rich territory that far too often we kind of shy away from. And especially so I don't know what life was like for you when you were in college, but for me, there were like 2 a.m. conversations about our place in the universe, right? I mean, that seemed like a normal 18, 20, 22-year-old thing to do. But somehow, and maybe it's, I know I'm a weird human anyway, but I suspect it's fairly atypical for people, let's say, of our age and career stage to have 2 a.m. conversations about our place in the universe. And I want to re-invite people into that space, right? It's not just something you can think about when you're 20. It is a important existential question at the core of what it means to be human. So let's do it. Let's talk about it.
Well, can I tell you, actually, so I think you're absolutely right. Except for, I think I find myself having these conversations with myself, and you allude to that about these questions that keep you up in the middle of the night. And my 3 best friends and I, we have like a text chat. Like I've got a couple different groups of text chats here. And after I'd finished my dissertation, I wanted to go back and start reading these things that were not about the work that I do. And I really got curious about what does it mean to be a man? So I started going back and read, Hemingway or whatever, just trying to get a sense of all these things that I never read when I was busy writing about early Florida and things like that, right? And those are the things that now we find ourselves, and it's almost cliche for me to be, say, a guy in my mid-40s. I was writing about this on my Substack the other night about the idea of stoicism. And I was like, here I am wondering about my place in the world. But isn't that exactly, as we start to look back, we've had some life experiences. What was the point of all of this? Why do we suffer? Why do we do whatever?
Yeah.
What's waiting for us here? So I love that you're fusing these things.
Well, thank you.
No,
I'm with you. I love this. I love that you are now embracing middle age with these existential questions.
I was at the gym earlier today fighting off middle age as hard as I possibly could.
I hear you. But, we could talk about time and how time, might be malleable and maybe age isn't everything we think it is.
Can't we, though? Yeah. Okay, well, that brings me to what, here I am being Captain Segue. I want to ask you about this because you said that you started this book 3 times over the course of 15 years.
Isn't that kind of embarrassing? But I own up to it.
I love that you do this. I love that you bring us with you on this journey to like why this book happens, what you're trying to share with us, the reader, and maybe these pathways that it takes. Because again, I'm about to head off to a conference tomorrow, to this Western History Association conference, and I'm going to talk to a bunch of young graduate students. about getting a PhD in history. And so many of them, like myself, when they were younger, said, I'm going to go be a professor. And I can only go to graduate school, and then I go and I become a postdoc, and then I become an assistant, and I work my way up. I'm like, that's not the way that the world works. That's not the way that life works. And you've got to be open to these pathways. And as best you can, enjoy this ride and make something of it, or you're going to fight the current that wants to take you on the river, right? So I was hoping maybe you could kind of share with us, the listeners here, how does this book come to be? Because this is a personal piece for you. As I read this,
It is.
It felt so personal. I felt like I was kind of growing up with you at some point in time. I want to ask you about this. But how does this book come to be?
I mean, it is really personal for me. And I mean, this is going to sound, I guess, really trite. So this is me being Captain Obvious. You could be Captain Segway and I'll be Captain Obvious. And we can both get superhero cloaks.
And tattoos.
And tattoos, yes. These are the questions that I explore in this book are things that I have truly been thinking about my entire memorable life. And at the end of the day, that's what led me into science, and it's what led me into astrophysics, was a real yearning and just a deep thirst to try to understand our place in the universe. And for me, I ended up trying to pursue that search through astrophysics. And then it turns out, shocking, spoiler alert for people who want to go into astrophysics, it turns out that so much of your time in astrophysics is spent doing the really detailed math and physics that you need to do astrophysics. And that makes sense, right? You have to understand the science to do the science. And I kept sort of waiting and thinking that, okay, I'll get the tools, I'll build the tools. I'm getting better at these things. I'm learning more. And eventually I'll get ordained and I'll be able to think about these great existential mysteries. And I kept sort of waiting for that to happen. And it kept not happening. And eventually I kind of realized that no professors were going to sit me down and explain to me the great existential mysteries of the cosmos, because for the most part, no one was thinking about them either. Or if they were, they weren't talking about them. Like almost as if there was a shame to talking about things that science can't necessarily pursue. And there's an embarrassment to admitting you might think about crazy ideas outside of the realm of science. And so I sort of kept it to myself for a long time, right? Because I'm like, okay, if I'm a serious scientist, surely I can't be questioning what caused the creation of the universe, right? That's just not a scientific question. So I can't admit that I'm questioning that. And these questions just kept building up and building up and building up. And so then at some point as a professor, I just said, okay, well, screw it all. I'm going to teach a course on this. Because I realized what students were interested in. Okay, I don't know how many people have had an introductory astronomy course, either in school or in college. But so much of introductory astronomy it sounds like it's going to be really fun. And I don't want to in any way discourage anyone from taking an introductory astronomy course. My colleagues will kill me. But a lot of it is learning like the detailed math and physics about things like stellar evolution, which is great, but it's still not getting to that existential need that I felt, and I am hoping, I'm guessing that I share with other people. So I thought, you know what? There are these topics that I think are really cool, and I think my students are going to think are really cool. So let's take science as far as we can, and then let's take a big dose of intellectual humility and say, okay, we've taken science as far as we can. What can we say at that point when we've hit the boundary of science? What can we say when we're into the realm of the unknown? And based on what? And what are the options? And how do we think about them? And how do they overlap with our own worldviews or spiritual views or scientific views? So that was really the origin of the book. So I started writing it. And then I had kids. And I also simultaneously decided that I had no business writing a book. If you think about it, I don't know if other authors feel this way. For me, writing a book is like the ultimate act of hubris, right? It's like I have something that I think is so important that not only am I going to spend my time writing it, but I think you should read it. And so to me, even now, I feel actually kind of icky being like, read my book.
You say we should read your book twice.
Well, I know. Isn't that terrible?
That's double. I was like, what? Okay.
Okay, how many times have you read it? But I want to give people permission to read it twice, right? It's okay. And then I picked it up again before COVID, and then COVID hit. And then after COVID, you know what? I was like, this is it, right? This is one of those things that if I don't write this book and I don't write about all of these things that I've been thinking about for decades and researching for decades, this is one of those things I'm going to regret, like on my deathbed, having not done. And there might be a few things I regret doing, but I think there are going to be more things that I'm inclined to regret not doing. And I didn't want to regret not doing this. So I buckled down and I did it, and I threw caution to the wind, and I say, you know what, this is personal. I'm putting it out there, and we'll see what the world thinks.
I'll ask you about this. Your book, like we mentioned a little earlier, is tinged with all of these references to religion and philosophy and things like that. And you had kind of said, and in fact, just a few moments ago, you dropped this word ordained, and I'm kind of wondering, because you kind of make reference to this in the book. You were like, look, I grew up in a religious household, and then I went looking for something else. Did you find, as a student, as a scholar, and now as an esteemed podcast guest, did you find like, was there conflict between those worlds? I found myself very much along these lines because I grew up in a Southern Baptist household in Western Kentucky as a child, and very quickly cast that aside as I entered into early adulthood. There were just things about it that just did not jive with me. And then, my ideas of like what a historian is and the idea of searching for the past and stuff, it just didn't work for me. Not that it doesn't work for everybody, but that's okay. Did you find like there was a conflict there, or how do you make sense of religion and science and philosophy all at once while you're trying to think about the universe?
Well, I think the first thing I would say, and I think everyone would agree with this, is that not all religions are the same, right? And I don't want to generalize too much.
Sure.
I will say that the religious tradition that I grew up in, for example, forbid the belief in extraterrestrial life. And even at the time, I thought that is a really odd thing to like forbid. But I suspect I'm not alone in this journey. That my deviation from the religion I grew up in took place over time, right? Slowly feeling like it just didn't align with what I believe to be true, and then sort of punctuated by some pretty clear breakpoints. But that being said, I want to be really clear. A lot of, there's this myth out there that scientists are not religious or can't be religious. And I want to tell you that is just completely false, right? I know scientists from across the religious spectrum. And it is possible to hold different beliefs in your mind at the same time. Now, there are some versions of religion that get along with science better than others. And most scientists I know who are religious tend to subscribe to those religions that get along better with science, by which I mean they're not overtly in conflict with science. But I went to graduate school with a student who was a young Earth creationist. And that was a fascinating experience and a journey to hold that belief alongside the astrophysical evidence for the age of the universe.
You set the stage very early in this book about this idea of knowledge and what is knowledge and how can we know what knowledge is. So I want to ask you, a very simple question. I'm going to ask you a whole bunch of very simple questions tonight. How do we know what we know and what is? You asked this very early on. Like, how do we even understand what knowledge is? So what is it?
Well, what do you think? Tell me something you think you know.
Oh gosh, the older I get, the less that I do.
Although now you've read the chapter, so you know the trick I'm going to do, right?
Yes, I've read all the chapters. Here's a problem with your book, by the way. I typically try to skim these, at least kind of get through it. Do the thing where it's like, okay, I get this idea of what they're talking about, and I can prompt and so forth.
Right.
And then I kept getting drawn into your book. You would just do this.
I'm so sorry.
I'm a little annoyed with you right now. It's because I sat here on Saturday, Sunday at my desk, I was like, I'll just get this. I did not just get through this. Right. Okay. Okay. What do I know? Okay.
Or
Let's
we
go with
can just
something.
invite listeners to think about this, right? Whoever
let's
is
do that.
listening, whoever is foolhardy enough to be listening or watching us, think
you're listening
about
to us
three
right now.
things. I know that's true. You think you know. Oh, can we talk about Boltzmann brains? We have to flag that and come back to that.
Okay. I'm writing it
All
down.
right.
Go ahead.
All right. You think you're listening to us or watching us right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. What are three things you think you know? And this, I do this fun thing with I think it's fun. They think it's infuriating. I do this with my class when I'm teaching a unit on epistemology, which is the study of knowledge, because I really want people to think about why we think we know what we think we know and what are the limits of that. And do we really know anything? Because if we're going to talk about what's unknown in the universe, we darn well better understand what it is we think we know. So I start this unit on epistemology, the study of knowledge, and I ask my students to tell me three things they know. And usually someone will say something like, I know my name is John, or I know I'm wearing blue pants, or I know that I was born on July 13th, right? Just kind of like facts about their life. And I started to push back. Okay, well, what is your evidence for knowing your name is John? And, what was on my birth certificate or my parents told me. And then we question those sources of evidence, right? They count as evidence, right? But, and I say this with confidence as a parent of 3 children, I am positive that every parent in the history of parents has lied to their children. It's just a reality of parenting. And so if you have gone through your life thinking your parents never lied to you, I'm sorry to disillusion you, but I'm positive that they did. So any of these things that we think we might know, we just kind of take, we really think we know a lot more than I think we actually know, with a capital K.
Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of epistemology, it comes down to how strong your sources of evidence are and how robust they are and how many of them you are. But here's the thing. No matter how strong you think your evidence is for knowing something, that could be debunked with the next piece of evidence that comes in. And so eventually, Stu, we'll play this game with my students, and they're getting increasingly frustrated with me. And they're young and 20-ish and super snarky, and all power to them. I invite the snark, and finally, I'll get a student who says, "I know that 1 + 1 = 2." They're like, "Take that, Professor Johnson." Like, okay. How do you know 1 + 1 = 2? And they're like, what do you mean? How do I know 1 + 1 = 2? It just equals 2. Of course it equals 2. How could it not equal 2? Duh. And I'm like, okay, well, how would you prove that? And they just kind of get perplexed. And I don't understand what you're asking me to prove. Okay, so pulling back the curtain here, to prove 1 + 1 = 2, this was an exercise that Whitehead and Russell did in a book called Principia Mathematica. They had to start with axioms, which is code for assumptions. So they start with axioms, and then they build out their logical argument to prove 1 + 1 = 2. And it takes them over 300 pages to, quote, prove something that I think most normal people just think is self-evident. And so this, for me, we think we know a lot. I actually kind of fall into a philosophical camp called global skepticism. I'm actually not really sure we know anything, and I don't know how we would ever really know if we know anything. But it's wildly unpopular, and people think that I'm stupid for thinking that because it's totally impractical. But, being practical is hardly an arbiter of truth. So be that as it may, I'm not convinced we actually really know, with a capital K, anything.
I don't know that they make stupid astrophysicists, but, if people want to make that assumption, I guess, I don't. Now do I know? Okay, fine. Okay.
Wait. Are you calling me stupid? It's okay if you are.
No, because you said some people think you're stupid for making this assumption, for saying that for having the skepticism, and I'm like, how is that possible? And one of the things you talk about in this book is the idea that some things may be innately unknowable, which is a thing that I want to come back to later on, because it's a thing that I've often kind of wrestled with. Like is a moral philosophy more just can't we just go with it? And that's kind of been something I've been wrestling with recently, in the idea of why are we here? What's the point of all this? When I look around, I see all the warfare, I see starvation, I see disease, I see suffering, I see all horrible, horrible things. I see, whatever. And I'm like, what's the point of all of this? Not some kind of cry for help kind of thing, but like, what are we doing here? And like, why?
Yeah.
Why don't I understand why am I here? And the only thing that I've come to, I read recently in actually a book by Ryan Holiday recently. He's quoting another guy saying, like your time doesn't belong to you. It's actually not. And I'm like, it's an interesting idea that the point we have here is maybe not for self. So I don't know. I'm still wrestling with this stuff, which is again why I found your book so enlightening. Which there's also light in the universe, I'm told, as I was reading about this, not in the black hole chapters. One of the things you do ask us to do is to unlearn what we have learned, to go get very Yoda.
Ooh.
In this book. You ask us this.
I love
right?
the Yoda reference.
Well, thank you. It was the first thing I thought of. And that's not even the movie I was thinking
I've
about.
never been compared to Yoda. I don't know if this is a compliment or not. Like, do I need to work on my skincare routine?
Listen, there is a Star Wars tattoo on this arm, so you better believe that is high praise from me. But you're asking, you're saying that we should forget about, like what we know about science, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are we trying to rethink these things from the ground up? I mean, what do we get from unlearning, I guess, is the question.
Sometimes I feel like unlearning is one of the most important things we can do. And it's really hard, right, to unlearn something you think that you know. When it comes to science, though, this is one of those things where a little bit of knowledge, but not enough, is kind of dangerous, right? Well, maybe dangerous isn't the right word here, but it doesn't do you a service. And science, I think, often falls in this category because, most, I think, well, for anyone who doesn't go into the sciences, which I think is most normal, well-adjusted people who have lives, people tend, maybe they had some science classes in high school, or maybe if folks went to college, they had a big introductory science class. And so they've had a science class and they think that they know what science is. And for understandable reasons, right? You've had a science class. But the problem with these introductory science classes is that they never actually, and sorry, this is me maybe being a little bit too disillusioning, they never actually do science, right? When you take like an introductory physics class and you're learning equations and how to solve them, and you're maybe memorizing some facts, and you're doing some experiment in the physics classroom that literally like millions of people have done, to which there is a known right answer, like that has nothing in common with science. It's the equivalent of like learning spelling and grammar. And so the whole, the creativity of the scientific enterprise is lost on that. And so I really want, I want to invite people to think about science differently. Science is about being curious and exploring and wanting to understand the universe that we live in. It's not about memorizing facts and solving equations and doing boring experiments. But I want to come back to that unlearning, right? I feel like unlearning, if we could embrace that as like people, and you said it, I don't even think I say unlearning anywhere in the book. So this is all on you, Jason. Like yes, unlearning, if we could unlearn some things that we think we're holding on to as knowledge, like writ large, I feel like the world would actually be a better place. When you talk about all these problems in the world, a lot of them, I don't know, I'm taking a right angle here, turn into some other territory, but we hold on to things we think we know and beliefs we think we believe so tightly that they cause problems. So let's invoke some intellectual humility and dial it.
Yeah, I feel like there is a cognitive dissonance at times. I know that I've experienced my own time saying, like, whether you're going through a relationship, like, no, this was going to work or whatever, things like that. Like, I think that there are assumptions that we make that based upon, I don't know, data and so forth. You were talking earlier about questioning the data in front of us or questioning these ideas. And I guess ultimately all this comes back to questioning. And I want to ask you another one here, which comes back to this. And I keep wondering, so much of your description of science actually sounds to me like the pursuit of history as well. When you're talking about, it's not about the memorization of dates or things like that. It's being questioned about, like, why? Why did these things happen? Was this inevitable? Is there a contingency to things? History is not the study of the past. It's a study of the present, through the past, and where our futures are going. But at least that's what I think I know. Now you're making me think. But here's the question. If we go all the way to the past, we're going to play around with time in a second.
Okay.
So here's the question, Kelsey.
Yes.
What caused the Big Bang? And how do we know it even happened?
Oh, did you say this was an easy one? Okay.
Yes, I did. This is an easy one for an astrophysicist.
Okay.
So my
here's
answer is,
what we're
I don't
gonna
know.
do. So, all right. So I'm thinking, let's tell people. We'll tell them the answer at the end of the podcast, so they keep listening.
Ooh, absolutely.
Even though, really, the spoiler is we don't know the answer. But I can give you a framework to understand why we don't know the answer, which is not quite as good as telling you the answer. But it's all we can do. Okay. So I love talking about where the universe came from. This is like, if I were to pick all the questions in astrophysics that I think about and that drive me crazy, but I still love them. Like, where the universe came from is like the grandmother of all questions to me.
Sure.
So, I could nerd out on this for a long time. Okay. So one thing, this is a very cool fact about the universe that I think is kind of unappreciated. And so I want to share this. But I want to share it through an analogy. So here's my analogy. Let's say you want to buy a car, but you don't have any money, but you do have a really good friend. And that good friend is willing to loan you the money to buy the car interest-free. Okay. So you go out and you buy the car. So now you have the car, which is worth however much money. But now you owe your friend that exact same amount of however much money that was. So you have the car, and you have a debt to your friend. And in some sort of real fiscal sense, your net worth is zero, right? I feel, this is not a crazy analogy. People have been here. Lots of people take out loans, maybe too many loans. Okay. Right. The universe is actually in a very, very similar situation. So with the observable universe, the part of the universe that we can get light from, it has a positive part of it, which is the mass and the energy, which all have a positive value. But then we can also add up all of the negative gravitational potential energy. So that's the negative value. And when you put them together, as nearly as we can tell, the net worth of the universe is zero. So in some sense, right? And I'm going to come back to this because there are other ways we can think about this. But in some sense, the universe is equivalent to nothing. And so the question isn't, in that case, necessarily why we have something instead of nothing, because we have the net worth of nothing. But it's almost more like, where did the loan come from? And how was that loan even enabled? And where's the bank that gives these things, right? So it kind of, it doesn't solve the problem, but it frames it in a different way that I think helps people.
Well, yeah. I kept thinking about this. And first of all, if you're listening to this podcast down on a tall building, maybe you should go ahead and step back once you figured out that the universe is nothing. But I kept thinking about, okay, so as you're talking about this book, I'm like, oh, okay, so here's where we enter religion or philosophy to explain why this, so if there's no one, so if there's no money, but there's someone that over here that offers the loan, where does that guy come from? And
exactly.
Right.
Yes.
And that becomes, boy, does that ever get into some paradoxes.
And that is the turtles all the way down, right? Because now we are talking about what is called infinite regression.
Okay.
Right. So even if I could tell you that, I don't know, let's make up, I don't know, what's your best friend's name? Or your cat, dog? Just give me a name.
Crystalline is my best friend.
Crystalline. So, okay. So even if I could tell you, Crystalline snapped their fingers and created the universe.
Yes.
Right. That's what caused the universe to come into being. Well, okay, you might sit with that for a couple of minutes and be like, okay, cool. Now I understand where the universe came from. But then you're going to be like, but where did crystalline come from? Right. And so for each step we could go back, we end up asking ourselves, well, but where did that come from? And then, but where did that come from? And so we end up in what is called an infinite regression. And philosophically, and I realize the limits of my own cognitive ability, but it isn't clear to me how to get out of this philosophical knot. It's really kind of a Gordian knot. And the other thing this invokes, and we can go there if you want, is to talk about there are actually different kinds of nothing. which is pretty fun to think about too.
Let's do it. Let's talk about different kinds of nothing. And let's
Who
talk about why
doesn't
God
want
can't
it?
get a car loan. So
And why God needs a car to begin with.
Right.
We're
God drives a
both
Buick,
gonna
right?
go to
He's
hell
old.
is what's gonna happen.
It's right. Oh, let's do
Drives
it.
a Buick. Oh no, now we've offended every Buick owner in the whole world. Do you have any listeners who drive Buicks? I don't know. We'll find out.
Yes, an ex-girlfriend in Miami. So by all means.
Okay. All right. So this is brilliant, and this is one of those things where my students. Okay, I think my students probably generally think I'm a little bit nuts, and that's okay because at least it entertains them. But I teach an entire class when we're talking about where the universe came from. I teach an entire class period on types of nothing, which I'm sure their parents are like, we're paying tuition for what? And but there's real stuff here to think about. And if we're going to talk about how we get something from nothing, we have to be clear on what we mean by nothing. And I think most people are not actually so clear on what we mean by nothing. So, if often I'll start this by having my students, I do a lot of free writing. I just have them like write blah, 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 blah on their pages and get ideas out. I'll have them start by like, try to define nothing. What does nothing mean to you? Like, what does that word define? How is that word defined? And I think most people, I'm totally generalizing by my experience in my own limited sphere, but I think most people, when you think of nothing, sort of think of like, kind of like an empty box. Or, if you think about the universe, we have the universe, but there's just nothing in it. There are no particles, there's no light, right? No force fields, just a universe, but with nothing in it. But, okay, here's the thing. Maybe there's nothing in that universe, but you still have the fabric of space and time. And that's not nothing. And so, okay, well, what if you didn't have the fabric of space and time? Well, to dial nothingness up to an even higher degree, we can't even have the laws of physics or the laws of nature, right? So a common refrain in physics when we're talking about, where did the universe come from? I think, if you happen to run into a physicist on the street and you ask them where they think the universe came from, most of them, I think, will answer it's from a quantum fluctuation. And to be clear, that explanation is very much still on the table. But to have a quantum fluctuation, you have to have the laws of nature that allow quantum fluctuations to happen. And that's not nothing. Or we could say, again, I think if you were to ask, any like normal person on the street where the universe came from, most people will sort of kick the can down the road or hem and haw, but some fraction of them will give some answer like God, right? Or higher power. Again, that is totally on the table because we cannot test it. We cannot rule it out. But I would argue, and I think like if there's a higher power, they would agree with me that God is not nothing, right? So we still haven't gotten to like a pure, total philosophical nothing. And so it's very, very hard to get traction on this. How do you get something from nothing question when we can't get back to a pure philosophical?
I keep coming back to the idea. I was watching Star Trek 4 as I was
Of course you were.
The other day.
Oh, wait, how were you reading and watching at the same time? Come on now.
I'm a very talented person who is easily distracted.
Okay, clearly.
So, and I'll get to this in a sec. And you use a different ocean-going creature as your example here, but the perceptions of what humans are capable of perceiving. You're talking about mantis shrimp, if I recall correctly, and all the different spectrums of light and things like that they can perceive. And I'm wondering if we simply don't have the input ability to figure out these equations because of the weakness, the frailty of the human condition. Now, I was thinking about this while watching Star Trek 4, thinking about, wait a second, this probe. And think about how maybe there's this great quandary inside that film where it's like, wait a second, this probe isn't here to talk to us guys. It's here to talk to these whales that we happen to have slaughtered all of them earlier, right? And there's the hubris comes back again, right? So I don't know. It's like maybe we're just not capable of getting there. I don't want to. But the other part of me wants to go. No, I need to figure this out still. Like I just haven't figured it out yet. Right?
Oh, you are my kindred spirit. I'm right there with you. And okay. I agree with you, right? Like okay, we are both, as far as I can tell, humans, unless AI is doing a really great job with you. And as humans, as the most apparently intelligent and technologically advanced species on our planet, we tend to think of ourselves as like the apex of evolution. Because on this planet, we appear to be the apex of evolution. Note the word appear, because I feel like one could poke holes in this. Okay, so we think that we're so smart, right? But I think it's worth bearing in mind, well, a couple of things, right? So I have probably too many animals in my house. At the moment, I have 2 enormous dogs and 4 cats. Don't ask, that's over our cat limit, but it is what it is. And I think a lot about my animals. And I think, what if I sat down one day and I tried to teach my dogs quantum mechanics, right? I am pretty confident that that is not going to work, right? It doesn't matter how hard I try or how gifted of a teacher I might be. And I happen to think I'm a pretty good teacher, but maybe that's all just arrogance and hubris. They just don't, I would argue, okay, and if you happen to be like an animal biologist who researches the neuroscience of dog brains, please forgive me, but I'm pretty sure that dogs, at least my dogs, and I think my dogs are smart as far as dogs go, would not be capable, just fundamentally not capable of understanding quantum mechanics. Or chimpanzees, right? Our DNA is only like 1.2% different than chimpanzees. That's like barely different. And yet I'm also pretty sure, again, apologies to chimpanzee biologists, I'm pretty sure that I would not be able to teach them calculus or even thermodynamics, right? And so if we extrapolate that, we think, yeah, our brains are capable of understanding maybe more than dogs or maybe more than chimps. But is there yet more our brains could understand if they were even further evolved? Like, to think that somehow because we are the most evolved species on Earth, that magically means that we are capable of understanding everything, I think is a logical step that we should not take. But like you said, that doesn't keep me from wanting to try, right? Let's not try. But let's also be mindful that we have actual physical limitations in our physiology, right? Through our senses and through our cognitive abilities. So we can fight it, and I think we should fight it. Okay, but maybe not through like transhumanism. I'm not a fan of that. But let's use the capacities we have and try. So you and I we're very aligned here.
Yeah, what are your options? Just to settle? Like I don't want to just. There are these 2 real aspects to like the human condition. I think that you're kind of keying in on here, which is one is the very real physical abilities. Like, look, physically may not be capable, and then there's the whole idea of the moral like pursuit of what it means to be human, which is like, but I have to try anyway, and maybe that's what defines human.
Yes.
It's like in spite of the obstacles, in spite of whatever.
Yes.
Knowing that I may fail, I'm going to try anyway.
I love that.
Well,
and I love that with these mysteries.
Yeah.
I when I talk to scientists about these, so many of them who've become cynical in their lives and their careers will pretty readily dismiss these mysteries that we're talking about as outside the realm of science. And if they're outside of the realm of science, what's the point in even thinking about them if we can't solve them? And I just don't buy into that, right? I think that, who knows? If we decide we're not going to be able to solve them, then that is self-fulfilling and we will not solve them. But even if we can't solve them, I would argue, and I feel like you're on board with me, and hopefully all your listeners are on board with us at this point because they love us and they think we're brilliant. I would argue that curiosity for its own sake has value, right?
Yes.
Like, we don't necessarily have to find an answer to get something out of that journey and benefit from thinking about it and benefit from being curious about our place in the universe. Like, I think there's real value there.
Oh my gosh, right? If you're a graduate student right now and your PhD advisor is telling you that you must have a full form, it's like, thank you for that, because I went to war with these ideas when I was a doctoral candidate. It was the pursuit of knowledge in itself, the pursuit of what makes you, and heck, just the pursuit of life. I was talking to a friend of mine, saying, well, I don't know what I want to do for my career. I'm like, man, just do the things that make you happy. And it's the quest, right? And to get maybe even metaphysical on this, you talk a little bit later on about the multidimensionality of the universe. And and it's so weird, Kelsey, because it's like you're writing this book about space, but I keep feeling like it's about the human condition. And it's all of these things kind of come back to this idea of like, wait, maybe they're just, as you're talking here, are there dimensions to what it means to be human? The physical, the metaphysical, these things like that. I don't know.
So I have to tell you though, I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is like,
please,
you just said something that for me, just went straight to my soul as the author of this book. And no one else has told me that they've picked up on this. And so I also just want to give, you and I really have to get together and have cocktails at some point. Or you're in Colorado, so you probably drink beer, but I tried to like beer.
No, they do IPA out here, and I am not that man.
Oh, okay. Anyway,
bourbon.
Really, for me, I'm really debating in real time what to say and what not to say, because I have this whole dialogue going on in my head, which makes it really hard to talk at the same time.
Say all the things.
For me, this book at its core is actually about the human condition. And for me, it's about thinking about what the human condition is in the context of the universe. And I'm kind of using astronomy and these big existential questions as a plot device to invite people into that space, right? Into thinking about the human condition amid the complexities and the mysteries and the size scales and the time scales of the universe. Because I just really feel like the human condition has gotten so small, right? We've put our heads down and we live on this tiny little speck of rock, and we barely even go outside at night. If we go outside at all, it's like to walk to a car. We don't look up. Almost no one can see the night sky anymore because 80% of the world's population lives under light pollution. And we spend all of our time like on our screens and inside, and life has just gotten small, right? And these everyday day-to-day things, I think, then just get amplified because we've lost touch with our place in the universe. And I really want to use, like, almost the whole reason for me writing this book at the core was as a device to try to invite people into a space, like an existential space of curiosity, thinking about the human condition in the universe. So I had to take that tangent because you brought it up, and it warmed my heart because that's what I was trying to do.
I feel like it's there. It's a very, what's the words I want to say here? It's an inward journey into outer space. I don't quite know. I don't know the right words here, but that's the way I feel.
Will you please write a blurb for my book and say that?
See, just a little. I like to play with words.
I love humanists. You know all the words.
I just like words. I get this from my mother because she will talk to everybody. My kids complain that I talk to everybody when we're around, and then I go back home to Kentucky, and my mom's even worse than I am. And I'm just like, Mom, nobody cares what you have. Mom, stop! I just want to leave. Can we? I know we're cousins. I know okay. I want to ask you about a word I've never heard before.
Speaking of words,
panspermia.
Oh, that is a good one.
The little boy in me just read this like, tee. Can we talk about extraterrestrials?
Let's talk about extraterrestrials. Where do you want to start? Go. Okay.
Oh, well, we can start.
That was not in a very good direction.
Let's move forward from the Big Bang to other people. Right. What even qualifies as an extraterrestrial?
Well, I think to answer that, we're going to have to say what qualifies as life. And that itself is a whole big can of worms. And
doesn't it though?
Yeah. What do you think of when you think of life? How would you define life?
On a basic term, right? I don't know.
You were out there sexing turtles. Come on.
I was sexing. Okay, for those of you listening, I'm not that lonely. But oh
no, was that before we started recording?
Is life? No, we're afterwards, so people know by now. Is life self-conscious? Like, is a tree self-conscious? Is there? Does that qualify? No, I don't think that self-consciousness needs to qualify as life, right? A thing that does it move? Does it breathe? Is it is a rock? I don't, an animal or plant, but of course it doesn't get down to the definition of what that, because then now we have to qualify what an animal, a plant, or a protozoa is. But on terms of this, let's say in our brain's eye, okay, everybody listening to, imagine whatever it is that you think of as life. Does life exist beyond this planet? Because there are other existential questions at work here.
There are a lot of existential questions at work here. And if I feel like most people, like you just invited everyone to think about extraterrestrial life. And I think most people, if they're being honest, when you envision extraterrestrial life, you envision something straight out of like Hollywood, right? It's going to be usually fairly like humanoid, even if it has like 3 heads or 8 arms, or it has green skin. Like it's not terribly dissimilar from something you would find on the surface of our planet. Mm-hmm. And I really want to say that, the surface of our planet is a very limited biosphere. And if we really want to think about what life elsewhere in the universe might be like, and this is where I love that you are like a Star Trek, Star Wars nerd fan.
Oh, yeah.
Because some of that speculative fiction that gets into really crazy life forms that have nothing in common with life on Earth, I think we need to be thinking that way, right? Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people think, well, I know life when I see it. And I'm like, but do you? Like, how do you know? And we could take any aspect of the definition of life and sort of poke a hole in it. And I expect, and I don't know, am I willing to bet something on this? I'm not really a betting person, but I would buy you a drink. Let's do that. But you probably would bet the same way I would, so it won't work. I really think that if and when we find other life in the universe, we're going to have to develop a continuum of aliveness, right? Because there are different ways we could define being alive. And does something need to meet all of them? Some of them? How many of them? Of course, being humans, we'll probably define ourselves as the apex of aliveness, right? And maybe rocks are the, minimum of aliveness. But there might be things, already we have things like, viruses, which are on the border of being considered alive or not alive. And I think we're going to find more and more things like that in the universe that are really going to question our definition.
Here's another question that I'm going to ask you then. If a thing is alive, then does it have to die? Or is dying a thing that simply happens because of the physical limitations imposed by life on Earth?
That's a great question.
Another thing that you did this to me. When I was reading your book, I was like, wait a second. If we are alive and we recognize human life as a thing, or my dog's life, or I have a single cat, why do things have to die? Right? Is dying a thing that has to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And these were things that I started to think about as I read through the book as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think about this, let's say somehow, we fast forward 100 or 1,000 years and, medical science is super advanced and immortality is now a thing that we can obtain.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Would that mean that we're not alive if we could be immortal? Right. And so I think this starts to bring in a lot of more philosophical questions about how we define things. Back in the day, and I wish I remembered the year off the top of my head, but I was not a history major. And so years like, whatever. But Schrodinger of Schrodinger cat fame, so Erwin Schrodinger, wrote a book on the physics of life. And it was one of the first books out there on life. And he defined life as the resistance of something, the ability of something to resist decay or to resist entropy, as it were. That's the physics term for it. And so he worked on a definition of life that was really based on physics and the ability to maintain homeostasis, which means stable internal conditions. But even that has limits, right? Because like humans, we're, I'm sitting in my, nice 68-degree office and I am well fed and, firmly in my middle age. And I'm doing okay at maintaining homeostasis right now. But that's not going to last forever, right? I'm not maintaining homeostasis indefinitely. And if you dropped me right now in Antarctica without survival gear, I would not maintain homeostasis very long. And so, the ability of something to resist decay is often considered an attribute of life, but that has its limits too.
Yeah. Again, these were these things here that I keep. Oh my gosh.
Are you going to need to read the book twice?
I did not go into. I was ordered by you in the introduction to read the book twice. You were like, you have to read the book twice.
Well, I suggested that you could. I didn't give you an order. I'm very nice.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Why do we care about black holes?
Why do you not care about black holes?
Listen, you said that earlier. Like, why wouldn't you care about physics? Why wouldn't you become an astrophysicist? It's obvious. Why do we care about black holes? With black holes? And what do they do? Because there are okay. So this is the movie I kept thinking about when I was thinking about your book, Interstellar. And I don't know if you've seen the film or not.
Yeah.
But this was the movie that kept coming back because of the association with black holes, with time, with multidimensionality. I was like, shit, why didn't I ask her to be on the other pod to talk about that movie? But and maybe I will. But what's the deal with black holes? You know,
what is the deal with black holes?
What's the deal with black? Oh my god, I just did a Jerry Seinfeld impression.
Okay, shout out to Interstellar though, because for Interstellar, and this is a rare thing in Hollywood, they actually consulted with one of the world's experts on black holes, Kip Thorne, to try to get the graphics and the science as right as they could. And I was like, hey, go Hollywood, actually attempting to be faithful to science. But it made that movie, to my mind, even more, well, I wouldn't say more believable, but I was able to suspend my disbelief even farther than I normally can in a typical science fiction movie. So why do we care about black holes? Well, okay, so all right, there's so many reasons we care about black holes. And I'm like, how do I pick my favorite one? The bottom line, I think, is that black holes, one, they introduce this incredible mystery because we can't know what's happening beyond their boundary, or at least we don't think we can with our current understanding of physics. But they push and they stretch our limits of our understanding of physics to the breaking point. And so they are, as far as we know, the most extreme objects in the universe. And, we have these two pillars of modern physics. We have general relativity and quantum mechanics. We've had each of them roughly 100 years, give or take. And if I were a historian, I'd probably care exactly how many years, but I'm not, and I don't. We've had them both about 100 years. And they keep, both of them have stood up to test after test after test, and we can't break either of them. They're just holding their own, and they're both crazy in their own rights. But despite the fact that no matter what we do, they seem to work and we can't break them, they don't get along inside of black holes. Like when we think about the core, the very, very central singularity of a black hole, quantum mechanics and general relativity are not compatible. And so we know that our understanding of physics breaks down. And so what happens in black holes invites us to thinking about a whole new realm of trying to understand the laws of physics and what they are and how the universe works. And they stretch, and in this process, they stretch our understanding and also literally the fabric of space and time. And because of this, they introduce all these crazy things that can happen that are outside of our lived human experience. And they enable movies like Interstellar as not actually being totally crazy.
Yeah. You're saying this.
It's not good if you're speechless. It's a podcast.
No, it's great. Listen, nobody wants to listen to me. This is Jason and Kelsey at this point in time. I kept coming back to the scene on the planet with the metronome where it's tick, tick, tick. And then there was another of Nolan's films that he does called Tenet, which plays around with time and entropy as well. Do you have a favorite misconception?
A favorite misconception about black holes?
Yeah.
Oh, there's so many misconceptions about. It's hard to have a favorite misconception because I don't like misconceptions. Right. I'll tell you some misconceptions I encounter often. Right. And this one drives me crazy. Great. So most people here I am generalizing again with no actual data. Okay. My conjecture, if I'm trying to be scientific about this, my hypothesis is that most people who think about black holes immediately kind of, or maybe even not immediately, but they believe that if I say a black hole was going to come through our solar system, normal people, I hypothesize, would immediately think that means everything in the solar system is going to get sucked into the black hole.
Yeah.
right? I don't know exactly where that belief comes from. But here's the thing. First and foremost, black holes don't actually suck. Suction, just to be pedantic, suction has to do with pressure differentials, right? And so like if you're going to suck liquid up a straw, you're doing that by creating a pressure differential. And that is not what's happening in a black hole. All a black hole is, and I wish you could, if you're only listening, you can't see me doing air quotes, like all a black hole is gravity. And so if like hypothetically the sun were able to turn into a black hole, which for the record, we don't think can happen, but if it did, it would be the mass of the sun replaced by a black hole. Well, if we replace the sun with the same mass that was a black hole, what would happen on Earth? And when I ask this question of my students, you're like, oh, the Earth would get sucked in. No. It's just gravity doing what gravity does. Okay, we wouldn't get light from the sun, and that would suck for the plants. And then it would suck for
right.
Yeah, and we would freeze. So you probably would want to find some other source of energy, like maybe geothermal vents or something. And
really
the plants would die.
Jacket.
Really good. Their stock sales just went through the roof. I'm sure of it.
So much.
But we would keep orbiting the sun the same way we have always orbited the sun, right? It's just gravity doing what gravity does. The only problem is if you get too close to the black hole and you cross what's called the event horizon, you're not coming back out.
Would that happen with the sun as well? As far as like if we got too close to the sun, we get sucked into that. The things don't suck. I'm learning here. Would we be drawn into the sun if we got too close to it? Assuming we could withstand
the sun
solar radiation.
Has pretty strong gravity, right? Just like you're being gravitationally stuck to the Earth right now. At least I hope you are, unless something really interesting is happening. It's just the same thing. It's just the sun has more mass, so it has more gravity. But it's just gravity doing what gravity does.
You asked.
That is not what makes black hole cool.
Okay, all right. Are there other dimensions beyond these? We talked a little bit about this earlier, getting back into that interstellar kind of stuff. But are there other dimensions that we can't observe, that we simply can't? How do we know what we can't know? Is another one of these questions that popped up. You just took me on a trip here. How would we even know that there are other dimensions? How does a fish know that water is wet, or does it even care? How do we know because you talk about space and time. Time is this other element here, dimension. Are there other dimensions? Do you believe?
I don't not believe.
Okay.
I think that there are, dimensions. It's one of these topics that, I think get a lot of flack for sounding crazy and like speculative fiction. And in some ways they are, right? And I will fully admit to that. But as a scientist, it's really important for us to step back and ask what if. And then after we ask what if, ask how we could test it. And the thing with dimensions is that there are actual reasons, like in terms of physics and math, to think that there are hints that other dimensions that we don't readily interact with could very well exist. Now, do I believe that they exist? I don't know where my intuition sits on that. I think there's so much sort of tantalizing evidence that there are things that we're not able to probe in our own dimensionality. But it's hard for me to turn off that empirical inquiry part of my brain. But I will say I am incredibly open-minded to there being other dimensions, and I would love it if there were.
I just feel like the subtitle to this book could be "Things That Keep You Up at Night."
Yes.
You ask if the universe is fine-tuned. Is it like how do we feel about the tuning of the universe?
You keep asking me these questions as if you think I'm going to answer them. The whole point of the book was that
I know. Go. I'm going to ask you towards the end. Yes.
Spoiler: I don't answer the questions, right? What I want to do is give people.
My question is, what do you mean by that? By the idea of a fine-tuned universe?
Oh, okay. Well, I can answer that one. Good job. All right. So here's the thing. So, I don't know how many of you have had the pleasure of like opening a physics textbook, or if anyone even gets physics textbooks anymore. But you can imagine opening a physics textbook and you flip open that front cover and there are like dozens and dozens and dozens of constants, and lots of Greek letters, and they all equal things to like many significant digits with super high precision. And they put them right there on the front cover for ease of reference, so you could plug them into equations and solve problems. Okay, that's great. And I suspect that most people who open physics textbooks and find these don't really think much about it, right? It's just some value that some person, some scientist somewhere found and figured out, and now you use it, and that's that. But it turns out that there are roughly 20 of these that appear to be independent. Many of them are interrelated, by the way, but there are roughly 20 that appear to be independent. And we can think about which ones they are, but for example, think about the speed of light, right? That is a physical constant that I think many people have had to use in a science class at some point, or you're at least familiar with the concept of the speed of light. And it's known to very high precision. So there are, 20 or so constants like that. Here's the thing. We don't know why they have the values that they do. And I don't know if you ever thought about why they have the values that they do, but this really irritates us as physicists because we like to know why. And we don't know why they have the values that they do. Okay, so that's sort of problem number one. We would like to know why they have the values that they do. But problem number two, and this is where fine-tuning comes in, is that when we think about how the universe would be different if we took any one of those parameters and just tweaked it a little bit, sometimes just a really, really, really little bit, the universe would be totally different. And usually totally different in a way that is not compatible with life as we know it. So that begs the question, right? And this has become a really big debate about whether or not the universe is what we call fine-tuned, meaning that all of these parameters are set just so to enable life as we know it to exist. So that is what fine-tuning refers to.
I want to close with this, and I don't spoil the book. All of this has been built. We're talking about like quite literally our place in the universe versus what we're supposed to be doing and things like that. I want to ask you what our place in the universe is. I think that's what do you want, or when you think about this now, what do you want our place in the universe to be? When you think about your experiences on the human condition, a scholar of the universe, but also of being a person, what are your thoughts on this? What do you want us to be?
Oh, this is
Couch
so glad
time, Jason. Yes,
you're closing with an easy one, and now I need that cocktail that we're gonna have. I mean, I don't know our place in the universe, right? And I'm not gonna say or indicate in any way that I do, but I do think a lot about it, and I wish that we all thought more. One thing is, I wish we all thought more about it, right? And we didn't just dismiss it as sort of a trite question that doesn't have an answer and we shouldn't think about. But from a physical perspective, in some sense, we can think of ourselves as, we're basically like collections of molecules. We're basically like collections of molecules that have sentience. And those molecules are made from the universe itself, right? Everyone has probably heard the poetic language of "you are made of stardust." Right? I actually think it's
literally
more like
thought
star,
about when you said it.
Right.
Right.
And I actually think it's more like star guts, but that's not nearly as poetic. And I think people don't like thinking about it as much. But
Bring that up on your first date.
Right? Exactly. I mean, we're literally made of dead stars. Okay, that's just the reality. And so we are. This just sounds so ridiculous, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but I'm going to say it anyway, right? We are, to my mind, we are the universe itself made sentient and capable of trying to understand the universe, which makes the universe, in some sense, self-aware. And to me, this almost becomes like an ethical imperative, in the sense that, as far as we know, right, and this could change any day now. I'm waiting for the news release. But as far as we know, we are the only sentient life in the universe capable of trying to understand the universe. And if we're it, like if that's it, if we are the only chance in the universe for the universe to be self-aware and try to understand itself, we better not squander that. right? And so for me, this turns into an ethical imperative that makes learning about ourselves and about the universe, it makes it like one of the most important things that we can do in our lives as humans on the planet. And then that makes, to my mind, that makes teaching like one of the next most important things we could do with our lives on the planet. Like, go teach someone something, right? Teaching is just so important, and learning is so important. And so all bundled up in this for me is, I don't know our place in the universe, but I believe to my core that we are the universe itself made sentient. And that is a huge responsibility. And we should do our level best to not blow it.
I love that. We've talked a lot about your book tonight, and I hope, like, as people are listening to this conversation, I hope that they know that there is so much. If I showed you the amount of text messages I started sending after I started reading your book, I told my ex-wife how much I loved your book. Because right.
Okay, but what about your ex-girlfriend who drives a Buick?
Well, oh boy, no.
Okay, that's a high bar.
We're not bringing that one up. But she did teach me how to make Cuban coffee. Kelsey, this has been an amazing conversation, and I am so glad to like talk to you. And just like, I was so, frankly, this is a heady topic, especially for me, who's not an astrophysicist. I'm just a guy, and opening this book and feeling like it was so accessible to me, and like, hey, it felt like, hey, come hang out and let's talk about this kind of stuff. And this is what I'm thinking about, And I think sometimes maybe there is, on the part, at least myself, a hesitance to engage with this kind of stuff because there's a perception that you can't get it, that like, I don't do math, I don't do physics. That's why I went into history. And yet then I read this thing and I'm like, I feel like this was for me to read. Like, and I am so thankful to you for doing this, for sitting down talking to us tonight. I guess in the final closing, do you have any last thoughts? That sounds pretty the end. But
I'm not planning to get hit by a bus when I leave.
Okay, good. I hope not.
Okay, last thoughts.
Yeah.
I really do want people to read this book, right? I don't actually even care if people buy it, right? Borrow it, get it from the library, right. Whatever, right? I really want people to read it because I'm just arrogant enough to think that I have something important to say. But more than that, like, okay, I'm a professor and I really love giving assignments. And if I could give everyone homework, I would say, be curious, right? Try to lean into curiosity. Don't think it's something that is silly or not to be explored. Like, embrace that curiosity because that is at the core of what I think it means to be human. Teach someone something, right? Share things that you've learned because that's how we grow together. Now I feel like I'm a Hallmark card. Sorry, this is bad. Maybe I hope these aren't my last words. I'm really not planning to get hit by a bus when I leave. If I do, this will be like, it'll actually be kind of grimly funny.
I'll write a nice thing for you because you said you wanted me to come back and write nice things. It'll be fine.
But then
I'm like, Kelsey was Stardust.
I was Stardust, and now I'm going to be right. Stardust again.
She's no longer sentient, right?
Okay, but here's the last thing I really want to implore people to do, because I really worry that we as humans are losing touch with our place in the universe because, frankly, we forget it's there. And given that most people, 80% of the global population lives under light polluted skies, it's very hard for people to remember that the universe is there. So if you can, and maybe don't do this in the dead of winter, or maybe do, right? I learned how to stargaze in Minnesota winters, so I'm there for it. Find a dark sky. I know I saw that. Go Gophers. Find a dark sky and pack a blanket and a nighttime picnic and some friends or family or loved ones and just go bask in it, right? Let the universe be in your face. And I promise you that I just don't think you can be under a magnificently dark night sky and not let your mind. I don't think you can be human if you're in that situation and your mind doesn't go to thinking about the huge existential questions. And you don't have these amazing, wonderful conversations with the people you're in. So my final ask would be, go find a dark sky and experience it.
Kelsey Johnson, thank you so much for being here tonight, talking to me. This has been just a blast. We are going to find drinks some point in time. Our paths are going to cross. This has been amazing. So thank you so much for being here tonight.
Oh, I appreciate it, Jason. So much fun. Such a pleasure.
All right, everybody. This was Reckoning with Jason Herbert. We've been reckoning on the history of the world and everything else. So thank you so much for being here. We have more podcasts coming. We'll catch you later.